Hi, everyone, this is the Encyclopedia Channel. This program interprets for you the classic of the century called The Great Madness. This book is known as the Bible that must be read in the field of financial investment, and its status is self-evident metaphor. But it is often not an official compulsory bibliography. People who have not read it can enter the market and make investments, and those who understand it can be real industry insiders. The Financial Times rated it as one of the 10 best financial works in human history, and Goldman Sachs included it in the must-read list for investors. Michael Lewis, who wrote Wall Street's textbook The Big Short, even compared the author of this book with such economic masters as Adam Smith and David Ricardo. So why is this book so popular and regarded as a classic? What kind of human characteristics do the stories of the French Mississippi Project, the British South Sea Bubble, and the Crusade reveal? How should investors guard against the evil of human nature when investing? After listening to this episode, you will understand. One of the key points of this wonderful book's high praise is that it can subvert the cognition of many beginners. Usually in people's minds, financial investment must be based on rationality, but this book reveals the amazing irrational behaviors that all living beings are committing, such as gambling, following trends, and blindly following. Its profundity lies in the description of human nature. As far as its essence is concerned, the literary quality of this book does not affect it to become a classic of finance. Since these human natures are common to different eras and countries, this book can never go out of date. Just like the financial tycoon Soros said, mathematics cannot control the financial market, and psychological factors are the key to controlling the market. That is to say, a truly brilliant financial game must penetrate the emotions and instincts of the public. The greed and fear of human nature are the essential problems that investors are always facing. Whether for seniors or ordinary people, financial investment is full of unknowns and imaginations, which means overcoming inner fluke and delusions. It is difficult for us to find a book like The Great Madness, which vividly shows the group madness that the whole society has fallen into in history due to the greed and extremes of human nature. It gives investors a God's perspective to examine their own cognition and behavior. And for non-practitioners, this book is also worth reading, because in a world surrounded by the torrent of desire, when a certain wave of fanaticism comes, whether it is a myth of wealth creation or idolatry, it is by no means an easy matter to not follow blindly. In 1841, almost 200 years ago, a Scottish poet and journalist of minor fame, Charles Mackay, published a non-fiction literature that vividly chronicled a series of great human follies, stupid follies. For example, the tulips that have been hyped into sky-high prices, the investment bubble that the whole country is crazy about, the fear of the end of the world, and so on. It is estimated that Charles Mackay himself did not expect that few of his poems can be handed down to later generations, but this collection of stories is famous far and wide. To this day, whenever the global economic situation fluctuates periodically, market sentiment turns pessimistic, and people start to stop and reflect, the sales of this book will rise steadily. Although there are only 3 stories in this book that are really related to finance, it has created a long-lasting topic in the financial world, and the most talked about story is tulip mania. So much so that when it comes to mad mania, many people will think of tulip, which is called the first large-scale investment bubble in human history. There is a statistic that the frequency of occurrence of the term mass delusion and the term tulip mania in history has almost always risen and fallen at the same time in the past 200 years. Now, we will select a few other stories from the book to share, including the French Mississippi Project, the British South Sea Bubble, Crusade, worship of relics, and Doomsday Prophecy. These stories can be classified into 3 categories: investment boom, fanatical worship, and doomsday panic, which correspond to greed, blind obedience, and fear in human nature. First part. Let's talk about the greed of human nature first. See what madness it can create when it overwhelms human reason. The first story, Mississippi Project, happened in France in the early 18th century, that is, 300 years ago. A financial speculation caused France to experience a magical madness. The protagonist of the story is John Law, a Scotsman. The shattering career he did later made him famous in economics. We'll call him Law for short. Law was born in Edinburgh in 1671, and his ancestors were engaged in the banking industry. This is a typical swinger, handsome in appearance, conceited and flamboyant, living a life of debauchery. But he is not useless. He worked in his father's accounting firm since he was a child, studied banking business hard, and has a very high talent for arithmetic. At the age of 17, after the death of his father, John Law took his inheritance and started to play the world. He first came to London, mixed in casinos, and became a professional gambler. Because of jealousy, a murder was committed, and then fled to the European continent. During his wanderings, he studied the finance and trade of various countries during the day and played his hands in casinos at night. He is good at calculating probability and never misses easily at the gambling table, which made him very famous. Such a luxurious life has passed for nearly 30 years. During this period, he went back to his hometown of Scotland to implement his own monetary and financial plan, but it was a pity that he got frustrated. He was also regarded as a dangerous person in Italy and other places and was expelled. In 1715, the 44-year-old Law ushered in a turning point in his fate. The famous French son King Louis XIV died, the 7-year-old little emperor succeeded to the throne, and the Duke of Orleans was regent. The regent had a friendship with Law many years ago, and he appreciated Law's talent and intelligence very much. During the reign of Louis XIV, the princes and nobles were extravagant, France owed a lot of foreign debts, and the annual national tax was only enough to pay interest. At this time, the domestic situation could no longer be suppressed, and public grievances began to boil. After taking over the mess, the Prince Regent was helpless. He was looking forward to a plan that could turn the tide and bring France out of the brink of bankruptcy. The crisis in France sets the stage for the advent of the adventurer John Law. Law arrived with his own financial proposals, played like a financier, and was treated like never before in France. In 1716, the French government approved him to establish Lloyd's Bank and granted the bank the right to issue banknotes. Law is a master at playing monetary policy. He made banknotes more reliable in the market than gold and silver currencies, and rebuilt the French economic and trade system on the quicksand of prosperous banknotes. Law's amazing achievements made the regent obey him, and the Lloyd's Bank was granted new privileges every day, such as tobacco franchise rights, exclusive gold and silver extraction rights, and so on. In the end, the Lloyd's Bank was upgraded to the Royal Bank of France, which was transformed into the National Central Bank. At the same time, Law masterminded a huge scam that made him famous in history. This is the Mississippi Project. The plan is to set up a leather bag company to take over the national privileges of conducting trade in the Mississippi River Valley and other places in the United States. The North American New World is rumored to be a paradise on earth full of gold. Soon, the wave of investment in the Mississippi Project swept across France, and the company's stock price soared. In 1719, the Mississippi Company was granted an exclusive monopoly by the French government to do business in the East Indies and other places. Facing the glorious road of wealth described by Law, the French could not calm down. Their madness was ignited, and they rushed to buy the shares of Mississippi Company. From princes and nobles to traffickers and pawns, they all dream of getting rich overnight. Gancampwa Avenue, where Law lived, was suddenly crowded with stockbrokers and investors. The annual rent of houses on the street was originally only 1,000 livres, but it suddenly rose to 16,000 livres. A street cobbler could net 200 livres a day by offering paper and pens to stock speculators at his stall. What's even more exaggerated is that a hunchback rented out his hunchback as a desk to impatient investors on the street, and he actually made a lot of money. All the thieves and scoundrels of Paris were also attracted, and there was a riot. Law then moved to the more spacious Place Vendôme in France. In a blink of an eye, speculators also flocked. Tents and stalls were set up in the square, where gamblers brought their big roulette tables to cash in on the already money-hungry crowd. Fewer and fewer people went for a walk in the park, and the Place Vendôme was full of people from morning to night, like a big vegetable market, so that the judges in the court beside the square could not hear the lawyers' arguments. Law had to move again and bought the residence of Soissons from Prince Carignan. There is a huge garden behind the mansion, and the owner of the garden, Prince Carignan, soon made a windfall. He set up 500 large and small tents in the garden for people to buy and sell stocks. The monthly rent for each tent is 500 livres. Income in pounds sterling. While the whole country is bewildered by dreams of getting rich, there are a few poor characters who remain sane, such as an old general, a scholar, and a priest. But when the old general stopped his carriage on the Place Vendôme and delivered an impassioned speech, all he got was boos and ridicules, and even something flew over his head. As for the two scholars and priests who swore not to get involved in this absurdity, when they met again, it was at the Soissons mansion, and they had just bought Mississippi stocks. The two had no choice but to pretend to talk about philosophical, scientific, and religious issues to hide their embarrassment. John Law rose to become the most important celebrity in France, and the limelight was like no other. Celebrities rushed to visit the residence of Soissons, nobles, judges, bishops, and ladies crowded the reception room, all stretching their necks expecting to be received. Even if Law worked hard, he could only meet less than 1/10 of the applicants every day. In order to meet this god of wealth as soon as possible, the distinguished guests resorted to various tricks. Law's servant was given countless tips, and also received sweet words from countless famous ladies, begging to inform him of his name. Some people even made ridiculous moves in order to create opportunities to get close to Law. A woman drove through the city in a carriage for several days in a row, just to intercept Law's carriage on the road. She planned to let the coachman drive into the lamppost as soon as she met Law, so as to turn her own people on their backs, so as to attract Law's attention. As she wished, Law came to the rescue at the scene of the accident and promised the woman to buy some shares in the Indian Company. Such absurd anecdotes were widely circulated at the time. Because the temptation is so great that it makes people mad, the stock price of the Mississippi Indies Company sometimes rises by 10% to 20% in less than a few hours. In order to be able to buy and sell stocks at any time, people carry huge sums of money with them, and there are constant robberies and murders in the streets and alleys. People from other places also flocked to Paris. The city's population exploded for a while. The streets were congested, attics, kitchens and even stables were rented out to outsiders, and prices and wages rose. Business is booming. Luxury lace, silk, mink coats and other fashion goods are in short supply. Imported high-end home decorations have become bestsellers. Luxury goods are no longer exclusive to the aristocrats, but also abound in middle-class families. Construction was happening everywhere in France, and towns and cities were expanding like never before. The mirage built by advanced consumption has dazzled every Frenchman. As everyone knows, on the distant horizon, there are dense clouds and a storm is approaching. The economic prosperity supported by uncontrolled printing of money is, after all, wealth on paper, like beautiful bubbles, shining brightly in the sun, but blown away by the wind. As soon as the confidence of anyone in the crowd is shaken, the wave of doubt will spread quickly, and the illusion will come and go quickly. At the beginning of 1720, a prince took banknotes in 3 carriages to the bank and exchanged them for coins, but was ordered by the state to deposit them back. Some people sensed that the situation was not good and began to exchange coins little by little quietly, and bought gold, silver, and jewelry, and then smuggled them abroad. After a while, banks began to experience a severe shortage of coins. The government issued a series of decrees to set the limit for people to exchange coins, and also prohibited the circulation of metal currency and the purchase of gold, silver, and jewelry. Those who secretly bought gold and silver were exposed, because the reporter could get half of the fine. Some citizens have become professional spies who spy on other people's property and privacy, and the trust between people has disappeared. All kinds of operations that can prevent the outflow of money have not only failed to save the credit of banknotes, but have intensified the panic of the citizens. When people lost their imaginations, Mississippi Indies stock plummeted. The myth of wealth is being shattered, and everyone in Paris is rushing to the bank, wanting to exchange the banknotes in their hands into coins. The run on the bank hit, the bank was tightly surrounded, and there were so many people that people were squeezed to death every day. The angry crowd carried the body in a parade and smashed John Law's carriage. Law has fallen from the unattainable position of Chancellor of the Exchequer. The streets and alleys are full of satirical and sarcasm songs, and caricatures of him are sold everywhere. John Law, who is good at manipulating public opinion, aroused public resentment this time, and his own life was in danger. The former minister who was dismissed because he opposed the release of banknotes was invited out again at this time. With the regent's permission, Law escaped from France and escaped death, but the government confiscated all his property in France. After hiding his identity, John Law returned to his old gambling business, and in the end he was deeply in debt and had a bleak end. In 1729, Law died in another country. So much for the story of the French Mississippi bubble. A speculator made the French have a big dream, tossing enough, thinking about how stupid their previous behavior was. Just as the French woke up from their nightmare, the British rushed into a crazy investment game. Unlike the flashy style of French society, the British have always been known for their rigorous rationality. But human nature is interlinked. Once caught in the dream of getting rich, the performance of the British is not much worse than that of their French neighbors. In this famous investment incident known as the South Sea Bubble in the UK, even the scientist Newton lost half of his life savings. In 1711, the British Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Earl of Oxford, founded a company. This company was actually to help the government finance and undertake the huge war debt owed by Britain during its participation in the Spanish Succession War. In exchange, it obtained the monopoly of South China Sea trade from the government, which is why it was called the South Sea Company. The South China Sea refers to the coast of South America. The British have heard that there are inexhaustible gold and silver deposits in places like Peru, Chile, and Mexico. They believe that British ships piled up with gold and jade will continue to return. Therefore, the shares of the South Sea Company are highly sought after. In fact, the money from South American trade is not easy to make. The 2 or 3 ships sent by the UK every year are not enough to cover the round-trip fare. There is still some money to be made in the slave trade business, but the ports in America were in the hands of Spain at that time. Spanish taxes are too high. However, stock price speculators have created unlimited imaginations for people, spreading news everywhere, saying that Britain has signed a contract with Spain, and that all ports in Spain's South American colonies will be open to Britain, and that Britain will vigorously develop gold and silver deposits in the New World. Anyone who does business with the South Sea Company will become the world's top richest man, and if he invests £100, he can reap hundreds of pounds in return. These rumors played a role, and in 1720, the share price of the South Sea Company rose steadily, sometimes rising 2 or 3 times in a single day. The British are like being possessed by a madman, desperately squeezing into the London Stock Exchange. In just a few hours, the Nanhai Company was able to sell 1.5 million subscription orders, and piles of bills needed to be transported to the exchange by car and horse. Almost everyone, regardless of class, high or low, is trapped in the dream of wealth and cannot extricate themselves. In the tavern, the men are chatting with stockbrokers. In the clothing store, the women are also full of enthusiasm. In this strange period when the whole people is crazy, people already think that stocks only go up but not down. As long as they can buy something called stocks, it means that they are going to the pinnacle of life. As a result, a bunch of virtual bubble companies emerged in the securities market. Projects that make perpetual wheels and water turns oil abound. Some projects are designed to cater to pastors, and some projects have a big blueprint, but no one can understand what they do. What's even more absurd is that someone just sent out a prospectus, which made people trust him. According to the prospectus, there is a project that needs £500,000, and shareholders will be informed of their business plan 1 month later. People only need to deposit £2 per share, and they can receive a bonus of £100 per year. Of course, the tricks of these geniuses all succeeded, and without exception, the planners all ran away. Those who participate in these crazy games are either bad or stupid. Greed has eaten away the good nature of the British people, and people have grown weary of those professions that require hard work to succeed. Even a vulgar person, even if he got rich by gambling and cheating, would convince the people of the time. The minds of the public are becoming more and more unhealthy. They just embrace the grand occasion in front of them, and they no longer care about the bubbles that are actually based on deception and illusion. In just 8 months in 1720, the stock price of the South Sea Company went on a roller coaster. When more and more people cashed out at high positions, the bubble would burst, and tens of millions of families would lose their money. Money plus leverage is even bankrupt. People of insight in the UK shouted loudly. The court rejected a long list of unreliable project applications. the parliament began to rectify the financial market, dissolve the bubble company, and demanded to review and severely punish the South Sea Company. The farce ended as the South Sea Company's share capital and profits were liquidated. The directors went to court one by one and had most of their fortunes confiscated. Britain, which implemented a constitutional monarchy earlier, ended up much better than France in this big scam. But this is far from the real end, and speculative waves will still return to Britain at regular intervals. Even if there is a lesson from the past, mania will also occur periodically. Just like Newton, who had a big somersault in the South Sea bubble, said, "I can calculate the laws of celestial bodies, but I can't predict the madness of human beings." The second part. After talking about the greed of human nature, let's talk about the blind obedience of human nature. This book uses a lot of space to describe the Crusades. The author regards this jihad that lasted for 200 years and killed millions of people as a group madness stimulated by political and religious fanaticism. Pious believers are not always honest, and under the catalysis of group madness, they can also become bloodthirsty war madmen. In the 4th century AD, Christianity, which originated in Palestine on the east coast of the Mediterranean Sea, was established as the state religion by the Roman Empire and became a common belief among Europeans. For Christians, the holy city of Jerusalem has extraordinary significance. It is the place where Jesus was crucified and resurrected. Historically, the number of European believers flocking eastward to worship here has never stopped. But in the 11th century, the owners of Palestine were replaced by Turks who did not welcome pilgrims. The Christians who arrived in the Holy City after going through untold hardships were exploited and persecuted a lot. Instigated by the monk Peter, Europeans were eager to wage a war to free the Holy Land from the heretics. 1,000 years ago, at the time of the final judgment mentioned in the Bible Apocalypse, under the call of the Holy Land, groups of European believers embarked on the road of the Eastern expedition. Pope Urban II told them that, as the closest place for human beings to heaven, Palestine is a holy land flowing with milk and honey. He promised that the land would be divided among those involved in the jihad. In this land, all human sins will be forgiven. Urban II urged with eloquent eloquence, anyone who, in my name, sells his property, abandons brothers, sisters, parents, wives and children, and joins the jihad will receive 100-fold return and eternal life. In a very short time these instructions spread through even the remotest villages of Europe. Strange scenes appeared all over Europe, the pious, the poor, the debtors, the criminals, men, women, young and old, as well as the lame and crooked, tens of thousands of people enlisted to join the army of God. Those who moved slowly became the butt of ridicule, and those who hesitated at first sold their possessions in a hurry to join the expeditionary ranks. People solemnly wear the cross badge on their chests and shoulders, and still meditate on the teachings of the Lord in their hearts. Those who do not take up the cross and follow me will not be blessed by me. Many women who sent their lovers or husbands into the army branded crosses on their bodies and painted the wounds with red dye as an eternal memorial of war enthusiasm. Some of the more fanatical even branded the marks of the cross on the delicate limbs of babies and young children. With the awe of the Doomsday Judgment, the yearning for the countless gold and silver treasures in the East, and the desire to make contributions and leave a name in history, the troops called Crusaders set out on the road. But this frenzy went to another extreme. The soldiers burned, killed and looted in the name of the sacred, and everywhere they went was devastated and rivers of blood and tears flowed. Because people think that as long as they go to the holy place, all their sins can be written off, so they indulge their desires without restraint. The Crusaders soon became a rabble of dissolute, and cruel soldiers under the banner of jihad. However, while this group of expeditionary forces was killing, they were also massacred in large and small battles. At the same time, they also had to suffer from hunger, illness, and plague. The book describes the 9 expeditions before and after the Crusades. Europe spent a huge amount of money and took 2 million lives. In the end, a small group of knights occupied Palestine for about 100 years, and the price was too heavy. Of course, this protracted Eastern expedition objectively prompted the people to learn from the painful experience and wake up from their obsession with the Holy See, which sowed the seeds for the subsequent religious reform. This kind of human growth is extremely difficult. If you read the descriptions of chapters such as worship of sacred objects in the book, you can better understand the huge superstitious power in the Middle Ages. Anything that is promised to be sacred is worshipped. For example, the so-called tears of the Virgin, the hair and toenails of the saints, the blood of the martyrs, etc. are regarded as treasures by people, and they are worshipped so much that they have to spend a lot of money to loot them. Not to mention the relics brought back from the Holy Land by the Crusaders. As late as the 12th century, one could still see wood said to have been taken from the crucifix of Christ in cathedrals across Europe. If these real and fake logs were collected, it would be enough to build a church. In the eyes of believers, these items can not only ward off disasters and ward off evil spirits, but also panaceas for all purposes. Superstition and blind obedience allow people to be led in any different direction. The Crusaders became a kind of fantasy polyhedron. During the Eastern expedition, the sound of pious prayer, the sound of drunken music and the sound of bloody and brutal killing coexisted at the same time. It can be creepy. When people's inner mania and sacrifice are awakened, they go crazy for all the meaning in their hearts. This is why financial operators can also read the harvest from the story of the Crusades. The third part. Finally, let's talk about the fear in human nature. The weakness of human nature is greed and fear. This is the two sides of one human delusion. If there are good things, there will be more. If there are bad things, I hope they can be isolated and exempted forever. Hurting behavior driven by fear can also lead to mass disorientation. In the European countries mainly described in the book, there is widespread panic about the end of the world, because there are stories about the flood and the Last Judgment in the Bible of the Christian world. In 999 AD, when the millennium catastrophe in the Doomsday Prophecy was approaching, a large number of houses and churches in Europe were abandoned, and people dragged their families to Jerusalem to seek the last refuge. The pilgrims are shrouded in the shadow of the doomsday. On the way, a thunderstorm will make them kneel down, and a shooting star will make them cry bitterly. They are told that the world will be destroyed and all things will be reincarnated. Such apocalyptic fears are by no means isolated from history. In the mid-14th century, when the Black Death, which killed almost one-third of Europe's population, ravaged Europe, it was widely believed that this was a sign of the end of the world. No matter in the city or the countryside, wizards and priests with fortune-telling and astrology can be seen everywhere, and doomsday prophets who speak freely can always attract a large number of believers. The book also talks about two empty cities in London. One was an earthquake and the other was rumors of a flood, which caused all Londoners to flee the city of London. Many people spent huge sums of money to build castles outside the city and store food and water. However, nothing happened in the end, and the prophets who were slapped in the face changed their words and continued to predict the next disaster. In all kinds of doomsday legends, the prophecy of a comet hitting the earth has also been passed on as miraculous. Whenever a difficult day comes, many people stop all business and work, and have no intention of living a normal life. Generation after generation of prophets seems to be a kind of rigid need for people's psychological emotions. Until modern times, the 2012 Mayan Doomsday Prophecy is still the subject of popular movie disaster movies. Fear of the unknown and death once caused people in the past to attribute bad luck to ominous people. For example, the book describes the cruel hunting of witches by Europeans in history, and it also prompted people to yearn for ways to avoid disasters and seek refuge and obtain eternal life. There are a lot of stories about astrologers and alchemists in the book. These stories, as well as the author's slightly exaggerated and sensational writing style, reflect a history created by human wishful thinking. The financial world is not a wave of theoretical formulas, but a mix of psychological factors. Like greed, fear is highly contagious among people. You can understand that no matter how many people understand the truth, don't chase the ups and downs when making investments, but you will always be gullible and buy when it goes up, and step on it when it goes down. This is due to the underlying human nature. People who have read this book will feel turmoil in their hearts. Humans have the ability to reason, but they do not rely on reason to survive all the time. There is always some fatal temptation that drives mankind to madness and to commit stupid mistakes. As the author said in the preface, people are very inclined to follow the crowd and follow the trend in a group, even if this trend leads to the abyss of evil. The book The Great Madness is considered to be the founding work of group psychology, and is often compared with another classic masterpiece, The Crowd. Le Pen, the author of The Crowd, once warned that people have superstition and blind obedience to groups, and groups often play a hypnotic role. When individual thoughts are replaced by group actions, people's will and discernment will cease to exist, and they will begin to be dominated by public emotions, becoming blindly confident and impulsive. In the magnificent records of the author of this book, the poet Charles Mackay, we can see that no matter what kind of group fanaticism, financial speculation, or fanatic jihad, it may lead people into a state of degraded personality. State. When the masses get together, fantasies are easily inflated, and people will find it difficult to control themselves to obey certain guidance and hints, and make crazy actions that are completely contrary to reason. Group psychology is a trait inscribed in human genes. Let's think about it. In nature, the group behavior of creatures is often the same, such as the group dance of bees, the migration of wild geese, and the migration of salmon, which even show some kind of tragedy. Conformity can give people a sense of security, but it may also make people a victim of group madness. Bible said, "There is nothing new under the sun." In the financial market, history keeps repeating itself, and investors will rush into investment bubbles one after another. For thousands of years, people have been arguing and arguing endlessly about this. The roots of why public investors keep using strategies that have been proven wrong time and time again are explored long ago in this book. As long as human beings have unrealistic fantasies about super high returns, scams and bubbles will never end. They change forms at any time and appear in different eras. All kinds of Ponzi schemes are like changing vests and harvesting wildly in different classes. Even the listing of the most cutting-edge virtual digital currency is no different from the strange scene in the London Stock Exchange during the South Sea Bubble period 300 years ago. As long as human nature does not change its greed and delusion, even after 100 years, human farce will still reincarnate again. If there is no reflection, then all the absurdity experienced by human beings seems to have never existed. This may be a question worth thinking about for everyone. In a world driven by desire, collective delusions and madness will still appear from time to time. As an individual, how to maintain a unique sobriety and avoid becoming a blind lamb among the dementia group. Both greed and fear come from the fragility of human nature, and only rationality and restraint can make people mentally strong. This is the end of this episode of the show. What do you think about it differently? Welcome to leave a message to discuss with everyone. Hey, if you like our channel, please subscribe us. Haha, remember to like it.